Well, hello there, everybody. We'll just give it a couple minutes here in case anybody's about to jump. See if we have people jumping in here. Aiden, nice to see you. Devin, thanks for joining us. James, great to have you on here. Yeah, we'll give it just a little bit more time, give people a chance to jump on if they're lagging behind a little bit. Hope everybody's had a great weekend. Got up to some cool stuff, some fun stuff. I know I did. My son had a bicycle meet, or a bicycle. That sounds like a really old way to say that. A cycling event. We're lucky enough to live in a place where they have a velodrome. It's a legacy of the 1994 Commonwealth Games, and it's really cool because the kids, the racing program that he's part of, which is mostly road biking, they have an opportunity to use that track multiple times a week, and it really helps develop their cycling skills. You know, I know quite a bit about triathlon development, obviously, and cycling a little bit, but you know, from a youth perspective, from a kid's perspective, I didn't know as much. And now that I've seen what track cycling will do and how it will help a young rider improve, I'm blown away. And you know, unfortunately, velodromes are rare, and so you don't really get a chance to use them if you live, you know, somewhere where there's not one. You know, in Canada, there's only a handful. But in terms of developing a cyclist, a young cyclist, what they learn on the track is unreal, and it sure does transfer to every other aspect of cycling, whether it's, you know, road biking, mountain biking, and you know, cyclocross, anything they want to do. The skills they learn on the track are just so valuable. So I wish every small town had a velodrome. Probably not in the community budget though. Looks we have some people asking questions here, which is great. And just a couple housekeeping things. Reminder that these episodes are recorded. If you want to back and review them, you can find them inside my Endurance Hub community. And we've recorded a lot now, and there's tons of great topics that come up. So if you're looking just for general answers to questions, definitely pop in there. If you have friends that are interested, get them to pop in there. Also in the My Endurance Hub community, we have webinars, we have daily endurance moments, small tips that you get daily, programs. I mean, we're really building, and gosh, every week I check in and see our membership just exploding, and it's so exciting. Really, I'm blown away with the response, and obviously there's a high demand for everything we have going here. So thanks to everybody who's jumped on board with us. Let's get started here. So looks like we have some questions. Best to put a question is in the comments section. So you'll see a little chat bubble at the bottom right of your screen there. That's the best place. You can raise your hand. There's like a raise your hand function. I say this every week. No one's ever done it, so I might miss it. So the best place, I follow the comments and I take them as they come. So pop your questions in there. So let's jump. James has the first question. Any tips for training in colder weather and preventing injury? So James, that's a really good question. You know, obviously, unless you live right at the equator, you know, you're probably dealing with a winter and summer season for the most part. And yeah, it's important when the temperatures get cooler to pay attention to a couple of things. So one is warming up is really, really important. And depends how cold we're talking here. Now, if you live in extreme, you know, latitudes, you know, in either direction, you know, once the temperature gets below a certain point, it's probably advisable not to train with real aggression. You know, high intensity stuff can get you into trouble. And I'm talking when it starts to drop, you know, below minus 10 Celsius, you know, certainly minus 15, minus 20. You have to be a little careful there because yes, muscles need to be warm. They generally function better when they're warmer. This is, you know, why we have warm-ups for every training session. There should be a good, robust warm-up. But those muscles function a little better when they're warm. Now, that's not to say you can't adapt. I mean, look at some of the greatest endurance athletes on planet Earth, our cross-country skiers. and they certainly deal with their fair share of colder weather. So, your body gets used to it, but when they're warming up, they would be warming up with multiple layers. So they would have, warm pants, and, downhill skiing's the same. Anything that takes place in the winter, they're often dealing with extreme temperatures, but the body will warm up usually for the event itself. So something like downhill skiing that takes maybe 1.5 to 2 minutes, they're in a very thin spandex type suit for speed and aerodynamics. And so but they don't spend a lot of time in that suit. They'd have a coach bringing their warm coats and warm jackets to the bottom. Same thing with cross country skiing. Their events are much longer, but they're generating a lot of body heat just by their physical exertion. So once they're warmed up, they can typically take off layers and be okay. But if the temperature is really low, they'll wear kind of neck warmers, or they might have a layer underneath their racing suit just to stay warm and keep those muscles warm. But certainly, if it's cool, you have to be really mindful of the warm up. And if you're not used to training in those temperatures, you might want to spend a week or two acclimating. Your body will get used to it. So if you live somewhere, like we live in Victoria, BC, it's a pretty mundane climate. It just kind of hangs about roughly similar temperatures all year. It doesn't get too extreme in either direction. So if you live somewhere like that, and then suddenly you go to a place where it's -20, you might want to spend a bit of time just getting used to that, or find indoor options. A lot of times athletes will wear kind of a neck scarf to keep their airway a little warmer. So there's a few things you can do, but warming up certainly is really, really important. So that's a good question, James. Thanks for asking that. Devin asks, it's still pretty hot out. Can you talk about training in the heat and how to properly hydrate? Well, yeah. So on the other end of the spectrum there, we're getting both ends of the spectrum here. This is great. Heat is one of those things that we do acclimate to. So again, if you live somewhere where there's the potential for heat, or maybe you have 4, pretty distinct seasons, where it gets cooler in the fall, and then you have a winter, and then it warms up in the spring, and then you might have a really hot summer. In those first few hot days, you want to have some easier days where you give your body a chance to acclimate. And the neat thing about the human body is it does adapt fairly quickly to warmer temperatures. What you have to avoid is just, you have to be progressive with it, just like you would with training load. You have to make sure that you're not, if you have a day that's 15 degrees Celsius, and then you wake up the next day and there's a heat wave rolling through and it's in the mid 30s, don't go out and do 3 or 4 hours on the bike right away if you're not used to it. Give yourself a couple of days to acclimate. So that's thing one. You need to be progressive and give your body a chance to really come into itself. Like high-end athletes, like Olympians, if they know that their event, the Olympics is going to be in a hot climate, they will go and train in a hot climate leading in. They won't just show up 2 days before and expect to do well. You just won't. The body needs time to adapt. Trying to think of an example, like we've had over the last few years, we've had Athens that would have been really hot. I think Beijing was really, really hot in the summer. And so the athletes getting ready for those, they're going to warmer climates to prepare specifically for that event and to give their body a chance to acclimate. One of the things they'll do leading into their event is try and manage and control their core body temperature. You saw this at the Tour de France this year. It was really interesting. Prior to some of those warmer stages, you'd see the athletes with these weird looking vests. They look almost like a bulletproof vest. They're not. They're cooling vests. So those typically just have ice packs through them, and they would have been in the freezer overnight, and the athlete will wear that prior to the stage to keep their core body temperature down. You'll see that a lot now in high-end athletics or any sport where there's a lot on the line. The athletes will wear a cooling vest prior to their event. So there's that strategy as well. But obviously, you have to take it off in something like the Tour de France, where your stage is maybe 4 or 5 hours long. Well, you can only mitigate that core temperature for so long. What becomes more important is that you've adapted to that climate as best you can. And the body's quite a wonderful thing. So to answer the second part of your question there, Devin, how to properly hydrate. Well, yeah, I'm a big believer in small amounts frequently. So the three things that we typically lose, or not typically, the three things that we lose when we're exerting ourselves in any climate really, and especially warm climate, water, carbohydrate, and sodium. And so those are the things you need to replace. And so hydration, or the water component of that, in my opinion, best delivered through a sport drink that pays attention to osmolality. So what it's doing is combining some of the carbohydrate and the sodium to optimize absorption into the body. And so if you're doing something, hour, 2-3 hours long, a sport drink's the best way to go. But they're not all created equal. I think you need to look around and try some stuff out first to see what agrees with your body. But certainly, you want to aim for, say, 500 mils to 1,000 mils of water in the form of ideally some kind of a sport drink per hour is the best course of action. Now, if you want to take it to the next level, athletes will get sweat testing done to see how much they actually lose in specific climates, and then they'll work on training their gut to be able to absorb the amount that they require. A good example is I used to do sweat testing leading into Ironman World Championships in Kona. Very extreme temperatures there. On a hot year, it can be really, really awful, and the humidity is very high. And I found out I lost between 1.5 liters and 2 liters of fluid per hour. Now, there's no way I was taking in 2 liters of fluid per hour. It's very, very hard for me to replace. But I knew that, and then I knew that I could try and train my gut to absorb a little bit more than I had been taking in otherwise. But some climates are so extreme, it's just hard to mitigate the loss. You just have to do your best to make the loss as little as possible. So to get specific again, how to properly hydrate. Well, if you're going to go for a bike ride, have a bottle or two on your bike. I recommend a bottle an hour. Typically, the bottles are about 500 to 750 milliliters of fluid. Typical sort of bottles that you would have on your bike, and so that gives you a good measure. That's a good place to start. If it's really warm out, you're going for a 2-hour ride, try and get yourself through 2 bottles and start there and see how that feels. We have to adjust from there. It might feel like a lot at first, especially if you're used to going out and not having anything at all. It might feel a lot to take in that amount of fluid. Now, again, small amounts frequently is the best way to do it. You don't want to just stop on the hour and try and chug a bottle back. Your body's going to be like, what are you doing? I can't handle all of this at once. Sip every 5 to 10 minutes so that at the end of that hour, you're through a bottle. And then, you just maintain a nice, steady internal regulation of water, sodium, and carbohydrate. Hope that answered your question, Devin. Like I always say, if a question can be answered in concisely and clearly in 1 minute, I can do it in about half hour. Okay, Devin throws out another question here. Also, do triathletes train all year? Are there events all year round? Well, yeah. I mean, we have a northern and a southern hemisphere, and so there's races at everywhere on the planet. And maybe in the early days of triathlon back in the late 70s, early 80s, there was probably a few here and there, but it really has exploded. And that includes everything from Ironman events. They're all year round, all around the world. There's in our winter, in North American winter, there's events in Australia, New Zealand, and the southern continents. And likewise for the World Cup circuit, so the shorter racing at the World Cup level or the Olympic level, yeah, there's races all year round. Now they typically have a season on the World Cup, but it probably starts January, February and goes right through till November, December. So it's pretty long season. There's always something to be had somewhere around the world. So yes. And do triathletes train all year? For sure. Yeah. I mean, at the highest level, yes, that's basically their full-time job. So they're training all year. They'll take, a few weeks off through the year. That's advisable to have some space from the sport to let your body and mind heal and repair and just take a little distance so that when you come back, you're feeling, strong and refreshed and hungry. So they don't train, 24/7, 365 days a year. There'll be weeks here and there that they take off. I typically took a 3-week break after my last biggest race, which is either end of August or in October with Kona. Then I would take some space there and then ease back into training for a few weeks. So yeah, I mean, the seasons are cycled. It's not like you got your foot on the gas right to the floor all year. You'd fry yourself. So yeah, but good question. James says, velodromes are amazing. When I was younger, my friends and I would ride our normal bikes on the velodromes and race. Yeah, that's awesome. Now, James, that's very cool that you live in a place that has a velodrome. Very, very lucky. What I'll say is I'll just throw out a tiny bit of caution. You know, some velodromes are open to the public. I know the one here used to be in Victoria. I think now you have to book it, probably insurance reasons. But the other thing to just be mindful of is that track bikes, or you know, the bikes that you use specifically on a track, are designed for the track. And one of the biggest things are the crank arm length. So the part where the pedals are actually attached that you're kind of moving around with your legs. Those crank arms on a track bike are much shorter. And the reason for that is because, you know, on a velodrome, the sides of the velodrome are sloped. And so if you can imagine, if you have a longer crank arm and you're not going fast enough, the bike, you know, that crank arm has the potential to hit the ground, and you have to be very careful, because if that pedal or that crank arm hits the ground, the bike will kick out from underneath you, and before you know it, you'll be sliding down the track. So, you know, for any of those keeners out there, if you do live in a place with a velodrome and it is open and you decide to go ride your bike on it, just be mindful of the fact that most road bikes that you would buy from a store, the crank arms are too long for a track unless you're going very, very quickly. You know, if you're going fast, the bike will lean over and there'll be more clearance for that crank arm. But a track bike, typically, I mean, they can be, considerably shorter. They're usually about a 165 crank, and that's 165 millimeters. And a typical road bike could maybe be 170 or 175. So there's a bit more room there on a track bike for clearance. And you'll see that's why, you know, at the Olympics, they can ride very, very slowly on those steep bankings because the crank arms are quite short. So, but very cool, James. I highly recommend it. I used to use the velodrome here to train for Ironman. I would go do my hard sets, like my 5-minute VO2 max efforts. I would go do on the track because it was such a nice controlled environment without cars, and I could really control the effort that I wanted to go. But I've never, really done track cycling properly. But it looks neat. You know, it's fun. Been fun watching my kid do it. That's for sure. James says, how long should a typical warm-up take? That's a great question. Maybe, I don't know if you're referring back to your question in the cooler weather, but, typically there's a few rules that you can follow that are good. So here we go. The longer the race, the shorter the warm-up. Okay, so if you're doing Ironman, you're not going to warm up for an hour before. You need all the energy and, carbohydrate reserve that you have in your body, to be ready for the thing. And typically for Ironman, you have to have your bike checked in anyway. It is sort of a limited capacity to warm up. So my warm up for Ironman, I'd arrive an hour and a half before. I'd make sure all my transition bags were good, had everything there. And then, I might do, a little bit of a jog, like 5 minutes or something, some arm swings, some kind of activation, get my body warmed up. And then I would do a pretty decent swim warm up. So if we were allowed in the water, I'd do 5 or 10 minutes of swim warm up, make sure I was really activated so that when the gun went off, I was really ready to go. But not a ton of warm up. Now on the other extreme, when I used to do sprint races, even Olympic races, I would warm up a lot because the pace was very hot in the beginning, and you had to really be ready to go. So typically a shorter race will require a longer warm up. It's a nice little rule to follow. So I'll give you, I might've been on the extreme end, but when I was doing sprint races, back, in the beginning of my racing time, I would warm up for 60 to 90 minutes. Before that, I would do, 30 minutes on the bike, and then I would do 10, 15 minutes of running and, some dynamic stretching, and then a really good swim warm up. And by the time that was all done, it was, 60 to 90 minutes. But when the gun went off, I was really ready to go. I was ready to put my foot on the gas and just go. So, in reference to, so the other thing to know is the hotter the race typically will shorten the warm up a little bit, because again, you don't want You don't want to get your core temperature up too high. You know, once your core temperature goes up too high, it's very hard to manage effort, and perceived effort gets very high, and it's just like really stressful on the system. So if it's a really, really hot day, warm up a little bit less, you know, just so that you're not, you know, losing valuable fluid and sodium and all that stuff before the race starts. Now, if it's a cooler race, yeah, you might want to warm up a little bit longer. If you're warming up for, you know, a workout in the winter, yeah, you might want to warm up a little bit longer, or be a little more progressive with your warm up, just to make sure that you actually get the core temperature up, and make sure those muscles are warmed up. And what you wear, you know, is really important in the winter as well. You know, you definitely want to warm up in warmer gear. And then if it's a really hard workout, you can have layers. Like layering is really, really important, so that, you know, in the harder parts of the workout, you might want to take off some layers. And then certainly for the cool down, you want to have those layers that you can put back on. So a great example of sports that function like that, you know, one of the best is downhill skiing. So let's take that, for example. In the warm-up runs and the warm-up, you know, before the race, those athletes will be in down jackets and like Gore-Tex and like all the warmest stuff to keep those muscles nice and warm. Their event is very high intensity. It's a couple minutes, and they're full gas, and aerodynamics and speed are super, super important. So during the race itself, they will strip down to almost nothing. I mean, they're wearing like a glorified swimsuit almost. You know, it's like a full body spandex suit that's designed to cut through the wind, and it might be -15, -20, and then they have a wind chill on top of that. I mean, it can be really, really cold, but it's only a couple minutes. They'll get to the bottom, and coach usually there with all the jackets and stuff, so they throw them on right away. So that's a great extreme example of, you know, wearing warmer stuff and then stripping down when you need to go fast, and then putting it right back on so that the muscles, you know, don't get cold and tight. James says, these are great questions, James. Thank you. James says, have you ever had to stop mid triathlon? Well, yes. Well, it's rare, actually, very rare. I mean, I've had a couple races over the years where, you know, I didn't finish for injury reasons or maybe sickness, but it was very, very rare. You know, I didn't like making a habit of that. It was not a good feeling to stop. Oddly enough, I never had to go to the bathroom. I don't know if that's what you're referring to. Certainly an Ironman, you know, at the aid stations, which are very frequent through an Ironman, they'll have porta potties there because it's a long day. You know, it's like odd to go through a whole day without going to the bathroom. But I can say that through every single Ironman I did, I think it was only the first one where I had to go to the bathroom, and I peed on the bike. That's a whole other topic. I remember it was Ironman Canada. We were coming down the backside of the first climb. It was like quite a long descent. And I was like, I really have to pee, and there's no way I'm stopping because, you know, I'm going 50K an hour right now. I don't want to lose time. So I just let her fly. And I got to be honest with you, it feels really good to pee initially, you know, the first 5 or 10 seconds because it's super warm. And then it feels awful. You gotta be careful what you ask me on here. But I never had to stop and go in a porta potty in an Ironman, which right now is striking me as quite odd because they're long days. But I do think your digestive system and everything kind of like it goes into race mode, you know, like it almost shuts down. But it is rare. Most athletes, you know, in an Ironman will have to stop at some point and go to the bathroom. But yeah, I didn't really ever have to do that. And if I did, provide it was just, you know, having to go pee, it usually happened on the bike. So too much information. I don't know if that's what you're asking there, James. Maybe I gave you too much to work with there. Aiden says, hey, I saw a post you did on leaving your shoes strapped in during transition 1. Can you talk through how that's done and what the steps are to learning how to do it? Yeah, good question. So I think what Aiden's referring to is leaving your bike shoes clipped into the pedals of your bike. So if you're brand new, you might not even have what we call clipless pedals, or the pedals that are like a ski binding. So they clip, your shoe. It has this like a cleat, and then it clips into the pedal, and it kind of locks you in place. And, if you're not new to the sport, you'll know what I'm talking about. Basically, it's a way to secure your foot to the pedal, which makes it easier to have a smooth pedal stroke and generate power. And you have lots of control over the bike. And so what athletes will do is leave their shoes clipped into the pedals. So when they come out of the water, when they come out of the swim, take the wetsuit off, swim goggles and cap, put the helmet on, and then they run out of transition in bare feet. And so the shoes are clipped into the pedals. They'll go past the mount line, and they'll get on and they'll start riding, and then they'll put their feet on their shoes like this. And then, they'll pause for a second and get one foot in the shoe, and then they'll get the other foot in the shoe. Triathlon bike shoes are designed to allow that to happen. So typically they have a very wide mouth, and the shoe can be opened up, and it's one or two Velcro straps. So you're not having to fiddle with laces or buckles. It's just Velcro straps. So the foot can come in, you just strap it up. And of course, this is really, really fast. At the highest levels of triathlon, the transition can make or break your race. Especially at the Olympic level or the World Cup level, you get out of the water, and it's really important to get with the group of cyclists. The top group of cyclists, or the top group out of the water, will often form a group on the bike. And you don't want to miss that. It makes the race very, very difficult, especially if you're on your own on the bike. And so every second you can save is really, really important. And if you think about it, the reason it's so much faster is because you're never stopping to actually put your shoes on. What you're doing is you're always moving forward, and you might get your speed up to 30 or 40K an hour on the bike, and then put your feet in the shoes. So you're always moving forward while you're getting those shoes on. And I remember some races, like the pace would be so hot at the beginning, and you just desperately didn't want to lose that group. It might be a K or two before you managed to find a little piece of time to get that foot in the shoe. That was rare. And as we got more proficient and better at it, you could get that foot in the shoe pretty quickly. Now, how do you practice doing it? Well, it's not something you want to go out to a busy road and just practice. I don't recommend that. The best place to practice initially is to set your bike up on a trainer. So if it's on your Smart Trainer or Wind Trainer, leave your shoes in the pedals. And every time you get on, pedal. And the first thing you need to do is get control of the shoe. So you want to get your foot on top of the shoe, which is, attached to the pedal. And then you start pedaling, and then you're going to take a pause with one foot, and you're going to, it's sort of hard to explain. We should make a video. We'll make a video of how to do it. It's easier than explaining it. But then likewise, when you get off the bike, leave the shoes in the pedals. So you have to practice taking your foot out of the shoe, getting control of the shoe. And then, when they come in for that second transition, they'll leave the shoes on the pedals again. So they never have to stop moving forward to take care of that little detail. There's probably lots of great videos, but we'll make a point of making one of those. I think that would be helpful for people. We may have already done it. I'll go back and look through our archives, but that's a great little tip. Now, sometimes at Ironman events, they will not allow the age group field to do that. And it's probably a safety concern, right? Like if you have a whole bunch of people who can sort of do it, maybe they're not as proficient at it as the pros, you're really going to clog up that area where people are getting on their bike, and it can be a bit unsafe. And especially if you're not very good at it and you're weaving all over the road and trying to get your foot in the shoe, maybe not a good idea. So I think at some Ironman events, they make you put your shoes on before you go out. But certainly at the pro level, you'll always see that those shoes never leave the pedals on the bike, whether it's going out of transition or back in. And it's pretty cool. It's neat. One other little tip that you'll see that they use an elastic to secure the shoe in a certain position against the frame. This is all much better done on a video. We'll just make a video because it's too hard to explain. I'll go on forever and ever. Okay. Oh, Devin and James giving me the laugh emojis. Thanks. That was probably about, peeing myself on the bike. I tell you, sometimes we get to the end of those Ironman races and you just be covered in like everything, pee, sweat, salt. One of the races, I was starting to lose my brain a little bit and I was pouring Coke all over my head, and then all that sugar was dripping down, and then it was like getting stuck behind my knee. And then every time I take a running stride, it's like my skin would get stuck together and then rip apart. And by the end of the race, I had like this huge kind of rashy burn there. It's just gross. It's not a very glamorous sport. Okay. James says, do you recommend the Peloton for bike training? Yeah, sure. Look, you know what? If that's what you got, then use it. What I would encourage people to do is, if you're just starting out, you're brand new to this sport, and you have a Peloton and that's the only bike you have, then use it. That's great. I think it's worth investing in a proper tri bike and a smart trainer. If you really think you're going to get stuck into this thing for a year or two or more, then get the right equipment. The benefit to having your own personal bike on an indoor trainer is that you're on your own bike. A Peloton's going to feel a little bit different. The crank arms might be a different length. We call it the Q factor, like how far apart those cranks are will be a little different. So, you can be on the Peloton, but you're training your body in not as ideal a specific way as if you're on your actual own bike. But again, if that's what you have and you don't have another bike, but you maybe want to prepare through the winter and then look at getting a bike in the spring, something like that, then yeah, for sure. There's nothing wrong with that. Like, you're still biking, which is awesome. So I think it really depends. The answer to the Peloton question is, it's great at some point if you're going to do a triathlon. Obviously, you can't ride a Peloton. I'd love to see that, though. You should show up at a race and just rack your Peloton in the transition rack. So at some point, you're going to need to actually get a bike. But in terms of having it for indoor training through the winter, and then maybe committing to a bike later, of course, yeah, it is not. I don't see anything wrong with that. It's great. I know it was a really useful tool for people through COVID. I think it really helped motivate people. And I've never used it personally, but I get the concept, and I think it sounds really great, because I apparently have like the spin instructor or the trainer right there, cheering you on, and that can be really helpful for people. So yeah, why not go for it? Okay. Devin says, I just want to readdress the James's question. Do you recommend the Peloton for training? I just would really love you to show up at a triathlon and rack your Peloton in the bike. Sometimes my brain can't get out of like sitcom mode, I love it. Devin says, I saw a news article about an Ironman in Ireland where 2 participants died. What are the safety precautions for Ironman and triathlons? How do they ensure being safe if the organizers aren't? Yeah, gosh, you know what? I did see that as well. And I mean, first of all, so devastating and sad for the families. I can only imagine, I imagine these 2 individuals probably so excited all year to do this huge challenge, and you're never expecting that. Unfortunately, I don't know the specifics around that situation. But the reality is there is a part of these endurance sports that there's an extreme nature to them. And the water in particular, there's a reason why it is swim, bike, run. Safety is probably one of the biggest ones. You don't want to do the swim at the end of 8 hours. You want to get people in the water when they're fresh and have all the energy, and because you want people out of the water. It's the most risky of the 3 events. But this happens. This isn't. It's not like this hasn't happened before. I've been at races where you hear later that an individual passed away, and it's just so heartbreaking. Because you expect it to be a really joyful day, a tough day for people, but they get across the line and there's a big celebration, and often families are there and to celebrate with them. And it's a big goal that they're trying to accomplish. And then that and what the heck do you do with that? So, I shouldn't comment about the specifics because, again, I don't know what the specifics of this situation were. Obviously you have that many people on a start line exerting themselves physically. Maybe internally something goes up, people have heart attacks, people, and they may have that anyway. It might have just been someone's time. It's hard to know. Now, when it comes down to safety from an event organizer standpoint, what I can say from my experience in the sport with Ironman or any of these events is that the race directors, majority of the time, if not all the time, are incredibly mindful of safety. So if there's a storm rolling in, if there's something, I mean, like, they are on edge, those race directors, and they are doing their absolute best to make the best call in that moment. These events will often have local organizers involved, the safety, whether it's fire, ambulance, people in the know in terms of weather and all that stuff. And so they will be being advised often by local authorities as to the safety if there's any concern. And so my experience with the sport is that the race directors have always been really mindful and great. And, and there's been a few times where they've had to make that tough call where they either cancel a swim or, have to reroute a bike route or cancel the race outright. I mean, we're dealing with that right now at Ironman Canada. It just got canceled. I'll address that in a second because of the forest fire situation. Obviously there's a safety concern there, but at this time it's a resource problem. Like, you can't go into a community that's been devastated by these unprecedented fires and hold an event. I mean, it almost feels gross to do that. And so but the province of BC made that easy for us. They just said they declared a state of emergency, and so any non-essential travel is not permitted. And so that was probably an easy call for the Ironman Canada people to make, because it was coming from higher above, and absolutely the right call. But back to your question, I think you said, how do you ensure I'm being safe if the organizers aren't? So again, I want to tread carefully there because I don't necessarily know the whole story. Maybe it was weather issue. Maybe it was. I'll go check it out. And then maybe comment on it. But as I said, typically the race organizers, their heightened awareness of safety is, top of mind in any race I've ever been to, because they have 2,000 plus people they just want to get through the event safely. So, but okay, so maybe to address your question, I think it's important for people to check in with their own comfort level. If let's say this was an ocean swim with some surf with waves or something, or the water was choppy, or again, I don't know the specifics of the situation, but if you are a weaker swimmer and you've only been swimming in flat, calm lakes all year, and then you go to an Ironman that's 3.8K, and you arrive and on race day it's super choppy and big surf and you've never been in it and you're not a good swimmer, then maybe you need to make the call to not do it. We have to have some self-regulation as well. There are races with those kind of conditions. Now, if they get too extreme, then race director will probably pull the plug, at least on the swim. But yeah, it's important to maybe not get caught up in the hype of the event and still check in with what's safe for you. Because ultimately it's your call. You don't have to do it. But also, there should be a measure of what's safe from the race organizer perspective. So I'm rambling on a little bit about that, but I feel very sad that has happened. And I can tell you that it's a race director's absolute worst nightmare. I can only imagine, what everybody's dealing with there. And that would pale in comparison to the families of the individuals involved. So very, very sad. Yeah. Aiden says, I know you're joking about the Peloton, but aren't there races that are done indoor in a pool with a treadmill and stationary bike? I saw one that had 2 rounds of swim, bike, run. What are these events? Yeah. So, that's grown. And certainly through COVID, there was a ton of that because, people were desperately trying to find a way to stay motivated. And, race organizers started having these virtual events where you could submit Strava files and, Garmin files and sort of get your finisher's medal, which was kind of cool, right? It was a nice pivot and a nice adaptation to crazy times. But yeah, there are these events. I think there's ones called the Arena Games, Super League. There's some bigger events, where they attract the pros and they swim in a pool and they ride on a stationary bike. And it's probably based on watts per kilogram, which is a nice measure because it's, you get on your bike and, if you're producing higher watts per kg than, your competitor, then you'll move quickly or more quickly, quicklier. Is that a cool? I just made up a word. You'll move more quickly on the virtual course, and then the runs are on a treadmill. Probably same idea. So yeah, those are things, and very, very cool that we have that option now. Technology's really helped advance that type of racing because we can, I can race here and someone can race in New Zealand, and we can pretty accurately, compare our efforts and declare a winner. So I think that's kind of cool. It's not a bad thing. James says, do you recommend any particular brand of hydration drink, BioSteel, Gatorade, etc.? So yes, definitely. I don't have a specific brand, but here's what I'll say: when we do endurance sports, we lose water and we lose sodium and we lose carbohydrate, and so you need a drink that's going to replace all of those things. BioSteel, from what I understand, doesn't have carbohydrate, but I don't want to comment on that. Maybe they have a line of product that does have carbohydrate. As far as I know, it's just water and electrolyte. So not bad if you're sort of an hour to an hour and a half where you don't need to replace your carbohydrate. Typically, we have enough muscle glycogen stored for 60 to 90 minutes ish, depending on the intensity. As intensity goes up, our demand for carbohydrate goes up. And so we have to be more mindful of replacing it. But also, as intensity goes up, the events are shorter. So often we don't really need to. But certainly for Ironman, half Ironman, Olympic distance triathlons, if you're 2 to 3 hours, yeah, you need to replace water and carbohydrate and sodium. So you need to find a drink that agrees with your gut. A product like Gatorade started as a way to replace those 3 things. And my understanding of the origin story is it was the Florida Gators football team. I think their science department was trying to find a way to help the football players, lose less energy maybe through a football game where it's very, very hot where they were. And so they developed a drink, and that was the origins of Gatorade. And, as it's progressed, Gatorade is sort of marketed to the masses, and they've added food coloring, and you buy it at a gas station. And it doesn't mean it's a bad product. It just means I think their marketing is designed partly for endurance athletes and sports, and partly for teenagers that maybe want to go get a flavorful drink at the gas station. That may be a bit harsh. It's not meant to be. They've obviously exploded into one of the biggest brands on planet Earth. And so, but they have a division, a more sports science division that makes what I would say higher end products, more products designed specifically for endurance sports, which are excellent. One thing that you need to be careful with any product is what we call osmolality, which is the concentration of all that stuff in the liquid. And if it gets too high, it's quite hard to absorb. So there's lots of products and companies that have come around that have, really paid attention to that side of things. Again, I know the higher end of the Gatorade products that are designed for endurance sports, they really would pay attention to that. I mean, they have a sports science lab that's probably one of the best in the world. And so, yeah, good. But there's other products too. And I think what you need to do is try various products and see which ones agree with your gut. Not every product's going to agree with you. I struggled with some, but had success with others. And then there's a taste factor, especially if you're doing Ironman and you're going to be slugging this stuff back for 8+ hours. You need to have something that agrees with your palate. So that's also something to consider. So yeah, I think I don't recommend a specific brand. What I recommend is that you I would go to a specialty running store or a specialty bike store, and usually they have the higher end products, and just ask and then try a few different ones and see which ones agree with you. Definitely mix them the way they say that they want you to mix them. Because if they are a good company, they'll pay attention to the concentration of that stuff, and their mixing instructions should put it in a place where it's the most optimal for absorption, which is what we want. Devin says, did you say osmolality? Yeah, it's osmolality, which is like a very awkward word to say. So that's the concentration of all that stuff in the liquid. And if the concentration is too high, it's quite hard for your gut to absorb it. Now, let's think of it in extremes. Something like a gel, which is almost a liquid, would have a very high osmolality, which means there's a ton of sugar in a very small quantity. And so if you look at a gel pack, or those energy blocks that you might get from a company, they'll always recommend that you take it with water. So it'll say consume with X amount of water. And the reason for that is you need to dilute those sugars a little bit more so that they absorb a little more easily into the gut. So the further away you get from that concentration, so if you go to, there's a company called Scratch, for example, that has the sugars are not as high as some other products. Osmolality is a little bit, better in terms of absorption. So yeah. Devin says, I learned a new word today. Yeah. It's just the concentration of, the sugars and stuff in the liquid. And if it's too high, it's hard for your gut to absorb it. Again, it's good to think in extremes sometimes. So if you have like a nice little light electrolyte drink without much sugar, it's very easy for your gut to absorb that. And on the flip side, if you suddenly just slammed 5 gels into your gut, that would be an incredible amount of sugar and very concentrated in your gut. If you're just sitting at rest, you probably wouldn't notice it. It'd be kind of gross because it'd be so sweet. And, at low intensities or no intensities where you're just hanging about, if you have a big Thanksgiving dinner, you can sit there and absorb all that stuff. But if you're suddenly going really hard on a bike and you put all that into your gut, it's more difficult for your body to work with it. So yeah, you have to be just mindful of that. There's a company called Infinite that actually will make custom drinks for you, and they'll have phone consult. At least I don't know if they still do that, but it was kind of neat. You could call them up and you could tell them what you're getting ready for and what your gut is like, and they've formulated a drink just for you, which I found pretty cool. Or you could formulate one yourself using sort of these online sliders. And if you did make a drink where the osmolality started to go out of the range that they like, they'd red flag it and they'd say, are you sure you want to do that? This is like getting too concentrated, might be hard for your gut to absorb. So as I said, the good companies will really pay attention to that. These have been such good questions today. Thank you, everybody. It looks like we don't have any more, but I want to address real quick with the last couple of minutes we have here. One of the things put in the post that my hubs was about canceled, and so just had Ironman Canada just got canceled because of the wildfire situation. And the question I posed was, well, what do you do if you're an athlete preparing for half a year, a full year, maybe more for this event, and now it's canceled? And so I thought I'd shed some light on that. Well, the first thing you need to do is just have sort of a perspective check and know that the call, if you are going to Ironman Canada or any race that's canceled because of extreme weather or extreme conditions, in this case, it's forest fires, have a perspective check and know that, in this situation, they made the absolute right call. There was no other call to make. It's devastation there in that area. Air quality aside, I mean, people are losing their homes. If you see any photos, you want to go Google it, go look at Kelowna wildfires, and you'll see photos like you've never seen before. It's unreal. Just the entire mountainside being engulfed, and it's just creeping down to the city, and it's just devastation. And so many people are losing their homes and having to be evacuated. And so the call that Ironman made was, not Ironman, the BC government made a state of emergency in our province and basically said no non-essential travel to that area. They need all the hotel rooms. They need all the resources. They need the roads cleared. And so Ironman, not that they would have, I think, hopefully made that choice anyway, but they didn't have a choice, where we're not really allowed to go there. And absolutely the right call. They need every ounce of resources helping the people who live there. I mean, it's just devastating. So, first thing is to do a perspective check and say, well, you know what, I was looking forward to this race. It's a real bummer, but this is the right call. Second thing is, well, what are you going to do about it? Now, with something like Ironman, I think they've allowed people to sign up for other races. I don't know for sure, but if you were on that list, you probably get an email with your options. And, what I would encourage people to do, if their family life, their financial life, if it allows, is to extend your season a little bit longer. It's a real shame to get this fit and not be able to use that fitness. So I would encourage you to sign up for another event. Now, if you're on the West Coast of North America, there are a couple coming up that are good. Probably the best one would be Ironman California. It's October 22nd, so you got to extend your season by about 6 weeks. But there's other Ironman events in North America and, across the world. I coach some athletes in Europe, and there's events over there that they will have access to, hopefully. So what I'd encourage you to do is talk with your coach and decide what the best plan is moving forward, because you really want an opportunity to use this fitness, and it might not be exactly in the way that you had planned, but it might still end up being really great. So use it. If that's not an option to you, then, that's tougher, because, we get lots of hyped up for these things, and there's lots of anticipation, and we've spent lots of hours and time and money getting ready. And so now there's a bit of disappointment. So I would encourage you to spend a few days just sitting with it. If you need to feel crappy about it for a bit, but then you got to collect yourself and get rolling forward again and set another goal. And if it's something that can't happen this year because your life doesn't allow for it, well, take a little bit of time here to, take some time off. You've still done all the training. So body will be tired, and then set your sights on something new, set a new goal, and get stuck into that mentally. And often that will help. So, anyway, that's all I'll say about that. This has been great. I don't think there's any more questions. Thank you so much, everybody, for jumping in. Like I said, this community is just exploding. I can't believe it. We're in the hundreds of people now. It's amazing. I'm so excited. If you want to see a recording of this, they are recorded, and you can find them in the back end of the My Endurance Hub space, along with our webinars, training programs, daily endurance moments. There's so much cool stuff in there. Devin says, thanks. Aiden says, thank you, Jasper. Yeah, you're so welcome. Thanks so much for joining us today, and really looking forward to the next one next week. Okay, take care, everybody, and thanks again for jumping on. Have a good week.